Welcome everyone to Mystical Abstraction, Women, Spiritualism, and the Arts. I'm Mathilde Walker-Billot, Curator of Programming at the American Folk Art Museum. A quick note that closed captioning in English is available by clicking on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. I'm joining you today from Queens, New York, and I want to acknowledge that our museum stands upon Lenape-Hawking, the unceded traditional homeland of the Lenape-Delaware peoples. We honor Lenape people, past, present, and future, and are committed to centering indigenous perspectives in exhibitions and programs at the museum. Next slide, please. So today's talk is organized in partnership with the Shaker Museum and is organized in response to Anything But Simple gift drawings and the Shaker aesthetic, an exhibition on view at the American Folk Art Museum until tonight, along with playing with design, game boards, art and culture, and the collection-based exhibition Somewhere to Roost. So drawings included in the exhibition, Anything But Simple gift drawings and the Shaker aesthetic, were lent by Hancock Shaker Village, a historical Shaker site located in Massachusetts in the United States. Next slide, please. So to provide more context for those who haven't seen the exhibition, Shaker gift drawings are spiritually inspired works on paper created in the mid-19th century during the era of manifestations, also called Mother's Work. A powerful time of revival among the Shakers. Newer believers, mostly women, claim to receive visions or gifts from the founders to pass on to the community. These supernatural communications were recorded in the form of text, songs, and drawings. Of particular interest to us today in this program about mystical abstraction is that these gifts were not considered art, but rather visions, manifestations of spirits that offer guidance, support, and encouragement. The ambivalent nature of the drawing serves as a springboard to explore the work of spiritualist women and honor the ways in which their unique beliefs and practices gave shape to radical art. This is an opportunity to place the practice of Shaker women within a larger history of European and American abstraction. So we're thrilled to have Jennifer Higgie and Hilma's Ghost with us today, both leading voices in the study of spirituality, women, and the art. Jennifer Higgie is an Australian writer and former editor and staff writer of Freeze magazine, who lives in London. Her most recent book, The Other Side, A Journey into Women, Art, and the Spirit World, investigates the artistic innovations of women who engage with the occult. The paperback will be released in the US on February 11th. Hilma's Ghost is a feminist artist collective co-founded by artists and educators Danielle Tegeder and Sharmista Ray, named after the Swedish artist and mystic Hilma af Klint. The collective's work is a critique of gendered power structures, providing a critical and revolutionary platform for rethinking gender in the arts, while recovering feminist histories as its ballast for critique. Their work ranges from the traditional to the esoteric, including paintings and drawings, surrealist games, a tarot deck, ritual object-based installations, pedagogical workshops, curated exhibitions, community projects, and books. So before I give the floor to them, I am going to go over a few technicalities. So this program will last for about an hour and 15 minutes. We'll start with presentations, followed by a conversation with our speakers. There will be time for Q&A after the conversation, so please share your questions for our speakers throughout the talk using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And I'll be using the chat to share more details about our speaker, their work, and the program. And if you need any additional information, please drop me a line in the chat. Please note today that the program is being recorded and will be made available online in the coming weeks. And again, closed captioning in English is available by clicking on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. Our museum is grateful for opportunities like this program to connect online, which would not be possible without you. I hope you'll consider supporting our programs through a donation to the museum following this conversation. Your support has great impact and makes a difference in our ability to champion the work of self-taught artists. And now we're going to start with a quick blessing by Daniel together.
Hello, everybody, and a big welcome. We're so excited to see so many people from so many places, and a giant thank you to the Folk Museum and the Shaker Museum for bringing us all together beyond the veil and in the material world. I'm going to do a very quick incantation or blessing for us with a candle. I'm going to light it, and I will say it quickly. I'm going to need your help. I'm going to ask if you can please put your feet on the floor. Just take a breath in with me through your nose and then out your mouth. Flame, one moment. Actually, I want you to imagine a silver cord connecting all of us from the middle of your chest, okay, as we do this. Flame of courage and collective feminist wisdom. By this light, we ignite the spirits of everyone who has ever been silenced, every artistic voice that has refused to be stilled. We call forth the strength of our grandmothers, the Shakers, deceased women artists, the resilience of our sisters, the promise of our daughters. Let this flame burn with the intensity of our collective hope, bright enough to illuminate injustice, steady enough to guide our path, fierce enough to transform the world and illuminate this program and our path forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this blessing. And now we're going to have Jennifer start and kick us off with a presentation. Hi, Jennifer, and
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us from London. It's a great pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Mathilde. It's such an honor, and I'm so excited to be here. And thank you so much to the Folk Museum and the Shaker Museum, and such an honor to be with Hilma's ghost, who I'm a huge fan. So, and that was a beautiful blessing. So, thank you, Danielle. That was really wonderful. So I'm going to do a really quick whistle-stop tour through some of the ideas and people who I explore in my book, and looking in particular at the 19th century aspect of spiritualism and its connection to art. I also want to make clear that my book is very much not an encyclopedic book. It's not an academic tome. It was a book that I wrote at a very particular moment in my life when I was going through transitions myself. And it's a book that explores connections between women, art, the spirit world, society, and also I weave my own biography into it. So I'm going to read you a very brief section from the book, and then I'm going to whip through some images for you. I'm starting in ancient Greece here with a marble statue of Athena, because much of this book actually was inspired by time I spent in Greece, and the idea of in Greece, the goddesses were powerful women. Every time you go to Athens, you're in a sense paying homage to Athena. To trust in art is to trust in mystery. The suggestion that no serious artist would attempt to communicate with or about the dead or other realms falls apart with the most perfunctory scrutiny. Across the globe, the spirit world has shaped culture for millennia. In the West, the Bible was the source of most pre-modern art, and it's full of magic, the supernatural, and non-human agents. Where would the Renaissance be without its saints, angels, and devils, its visions of humans manipulated by powers beyond their comprehension? Or ancient Greece without its gods and goddesses who shapeshifted at the drop of a hat? Or, for that matter, the many riches of First Nations art. But then art itself is a form of alchemy, the transformation of one thing, an idea, a material, into another. It is in its nature to be elusive rather than literal, to deal in association, symbol, and encryption, to honor intuition and imagination over reason, All of this chimes with much magical practice. It's as unconcerned as a prophet with accuracy. Physicists tell us that our reading of time is crude, but artists have always known this. They constantly mine the past, even as they're imagining possible futures. How can change, be it new machines or new ideas, be visualized if it can't first be imagined? And who would ever assume that imaginations run along straight lines? Most artists are, in some shape or form, time travelers and ghost whisperers. They have myriad ways of accessing the dead, via the tangible proof of their thinking, books or paintings or music, say, or through more esoteric means, mediumship, intuition, ritual, dreams, call it what you will. Although numerous 19th and early 20th century artists created their pictures via spirit communication, the more I discovered about them, the less I cared about the veracity of their claims about connecting with the dead. The creative act is often mystifying. To pin it down and dissect it is possibly the least interesting and possibly the most futile thing you can do with it. So when I was writing this book, I'm Australian, and I've always been in absolute awe of First Nations art and knowledge. And I saw this painting at an exhibition called The Seven Sisters, which was put on by the Museum of Australia and then travelled actually to England. And I saw this painting, which was made in the APY desert lands of Australia, which is in the central deserts of Australia, by a group of extraordinary women, artists who came together to create this painting, which in many ways functions on different levels. If you know nothing about the belief systems that inspired this extraordinary work, you can see it as an extraordinarily beautiful abstract painting. It looks a bit like Bauhaus rug making or design, for example. But once you get to know what this painting represents, it represents a mythic and a deeply traditional knowledge. It represents laws across the lands. On the top left-hand side, it represents the seven sisters escaping a wicked magician up into the sky. It's a map of the land. It's got water holes on it. It's got hunting grounds in it. It's got, there is so much information in this image. And I think that's an important thing to remember when we look at many paintings made by spiritual or belief systems that we don't necessarily know deeply. We can understand that these images can work on many different levels. I want to go back now to the 12th century, to someone who was very influential on me, and that was Hildegard of Bingen, who was a nun, an abbess, a naturalist, the first named composer in history. She was an artist, and this is her receiving a vision. It sort of comes down like a cosmic octopus almost into it. You can see here that the spirit, the energy of the spirit that she is receiving is seen as almost a concrete entity, as a physical thing. Now, Hildegard was, she's become very popular among so many people I know, and in exhibitions and in areas from music to art to ecology. And, you know, in the 12th century, she came up with this, she created this book, the Liber Divorum Operum, excuse my pronunciation. And in it, she explores what she sees was this radiance in creation, in the greening of the earth, in the sprouting of the seeds, and the blossoming of plants. And she called this sort of worldview of hers viriditas, a greening of the planet that is infused with a spiritual principle and a healing that can bring about planetary attunement. And one of the many things that is interesting about Hildegard of Bingen, she is like so many artists, especially women artists in the 19th century, who were also very deeply involved with spiritualism. She was also very interested in science and innovations around how we can see and understand the world through scientific principles. I think many people come to the idea of spirituality and see it as a sort of anti-science. But the more I read about many of these artists, that became entirely untrue. It's a lot of spiritualists are very interested in how the world is put together, how we can understand it, and how we can represent it. And as I mentioned in the small bit that I read before from my book, you know, the idea of spirituality has obviously been closely entwined with the history of art since the beginning. It was really only in the late 19th or early 20th century when the idea of religion started to separate from what motivated pictures. And another thing that I explore in my books is the exclusion, the gender exclusion of art history, traditional art histories. This is just one of many women. This is by one of many women who were making a living in the Renaissance as professional artists. Lavinia Fontana, extraordinary artist. She had 11 children. Her husband ran her studio, and she made a lot of extraordinarily cosmic and wonderful paintings, exploring the idea of spirituality almost as a physical thing. Then we leap ahead to the 19th century. I'm sure many of you know about Maggie and Kate Fox, who really were the beginnings of modern spiritualism. As teenagers, they heard raps from their cellar. They went on to become superstars, really, in the spiritual world. And this was at a time when, as I mentioned, the world is becoming extremely interested in science, in how we represent the world, in new innovations. Spiritualism really did run along the same time as, for example, innovations in communication. We had telegrams where you could send words across the seas. We had X-rays where for the first time you could see inside a body. And if the atom is discovered, we have Charles Darwin looking at the history of evolution and how we might have become who we are today. So it was also aligned with a period of great grief. Of course, not long after this photograph was taken, America erupted into a civil war in which 2% of the population was killed. And you see a country that is in great grief, and it is trying to it wants to make sure that the beloved people are okay on the other side. And so spiritualism, the idea of channeling, the idea of mediumship, the idea of seances really took off. And Maggie and Kate Fox really were the match that started the flames that spread across the United States to England, Europe, and Australia in particular. But of course, all great social movements are aligned with other movements. And one of the many positive things about spiritualism was that it was on the right side of history, in that most spiritualists were great supporters of abolitionism. And we have here the great Sojourner Truth, who was born enslaved and fled with her daughter, and became a great proponent and speaker on women's rights, on abolitionism, and of course, on the spirit, on the power of the spirit, and how it could communicate through powerful women. In 1887, we've got Madame Blavatsky, who is one of the founders of the Theosophical Society, which was to have a huge impact, not only on society generally, but on art as well. Because Madame Blavatsky, an extraordinarily complex and charismatic woman who was Russian, the first Russian actually to get an American passport, she was very fascinated by Eastern religions, and she brought in many of the Eastern religions into sort of general discourse around spirituality in the West. And so you could say that the Theosophical Society was sort of the beginnings of what we might now call the New Age. And many artists and writers, and also physicists such as Newton and Marie Curie, became really interested in theosophy and in this idea that what we see in the physical world isn't necessarily all that there is, perhaps. And so it was a great exploration of ways of understanding the world, exploring different belief systems. Over in England, we've got Anna Mary Howitt, who trained as an artist, and then she became Britain's first drawing medium. She's an extraordinarily interesting artist. And again, Anna Mary Howitt was part of a big group of women who they were interested in spiritualism. They were interested in female suffrage. It's important to remember that in the 19th century, women in all of these countries I'm mentioning had no political agency. They were directed by their husbands, their fathers, their brothers. And so spiritualism was one of the few belief systems that actually encouraged them to have a voice, to be able to speak from the heart, speak from the soul, and to express themselves. She was an extraordinary person. And we have other artists such as Barbara Honeywood. And we see here, there's really interesting connections in the 19th century between what a lot of spiritualist artists were doing and what later the surrealists would describe as, say, automatic painting or automatic writing. So they're not painting with any preconceived idea of what they might create, but they're channeling spirits. And this is what the result of that, which in many ways was a form of early abstraction. It's an absolutely fascinating moment in time. And of course, 2024 was the centenary of the first Surrealist Manifesto. And in many ways, it was celebrated, you know, as a male-driven movement. André Breton writing the first Surrealist Manifesto, brilliant artists, great thinkers, but the idea that this kind of thinking started in 1924 is way too simplistic. We also have more Barbara Honeywood sketches here. And we also have artists who are experimenting with ways of creating images. Margaret Watts Hughes was a fascinating woman. She was actually a soprano, and she created these images, which she also saw as, you know, as I write here, voice figures singing into shape these peculiar forms. She was a very religious woman, and she saw this as a sort of spirit manifested. She would blow down a tube onto sand, which would create, that was mixing with pigment. It was quite a complicated process, but she made these extraordinary images in the 1890s. Then we get to Georgiana Houghton, who is one of the great spiritualist artists of the 19th century. She started going to, because seances were all the rage in Victorian England. Everyone was doing it. And she was invited next door by her neighbor to go to a seance. She had suffered great grief, again, the connection between spiritualism and grief. And she received messages in this seance that she said no one but her could have possibly known. And so she became a devout believer in spiritualism. She had many spirit guides, and I love this photograph of her because she looks like a respectable Victorian woman, but if you look a little closely, she's got a dagger holding up her hair. So I think that's a really potent symbol there. And she made these extraordinary paintings in the 1860s. And I showed you before Annie, the painter, and this is a portrait of her. And they're a bit like, you know, a cosmic Jackson Pollock. She rented a gallery in the early 1870s in New Bond Street, and she put an exhibition of these paintings on. Can you imagine them? They would have been like a spaceship landing in Piccadilly, you know, in the middle of Victorian Britain. But very interestingly, she was quite widely reviewed. And she was, of course, torn apart by some critics, but other critics found what she was doing was fascinating. And she sat in the gallery every day and talked to people. And she wrote an autobiography, which is easily accessible. You can buy it on Kindle, for example. And she talks about how it was the artists who came in and were really fascinated with this idea of this new kind of representation, where you're representing, in a sense, energy, spirit, channeling, connection to other realms. That's another portrait of her, by her rather. And this is the catalogue of her spirit drawings. She sent it to Queen Victoria, to politicians all over the place. She didn't get any replies, but I'd love to get my hands on one of these. There's another one of her paintings. Many of these she saw as sort of spiritual portraits. In 1905, a very significant book was published called Thought Forms, and it was written by Annie Besant, who was the second generation theosophical leader. She had started life as a socialist and an atheist. She became a devout follower of Madame Blavatsky, and she too became very interested in how vibrations, feelings, moods might be represented in a physical way. And so this book became extremely influential with people like Kandinsky, for example, Hilma af Klint, and a slew of other artists who were very interested in this work that they were doing. And you can see here some examples, and you can see here what these are. Annie Besant and Charles Leadbeater employed 5 artists, and they gave them these instructions about how to represent these various moods. And you can see here a small cross section. And this book has recently been reissued, and there are beautiful facsimile editions of it, which I really recommend. As I mentioned, Kandinsky, Vasily Kandinsky, he was extremely interested in all of this, as was Mondrian, as was Paul Klee. So many artists were interested in the intersection of theosophical thinking, spiritualism, and he wrote this very important essay concerning the spiritual in art in 1912. And again, it's an extraordinarily interesting and important document, and I'm a huge fan of Kandinsky, but he didn't invent this way of thinking by any means. And then we move on quickly to Hilma af Klint. And I'm sure many of you would have seen or heard about the big exhibition at the Guggenheim in 2018. But Hilma af Klint, in a way, was my gateway into this world. When I saw her exhibition, an exhibition of her work in Stockholm in 2013, I have never been more astonished by an exhibition. She trained as a traditional artist, and then she worked initially with a group of women called Der Femme. It was a collective activity. They were spiritualists. They began making art. She and her girlfriend Anna Cassell were both artists, obviously, and then they began exploring these new ways of representing the world. This is the 10 stages of life. And Hilma was, she writes in one of her 27,000 pages of notes she left behind, that the spirits came to her with this great task to create this new language. And these pictures are extraordinarily interesting and beautiful. There's more and more research being done on Hilma af Klint, and it's more than likely now that it's been discovered that many of these works were made collaboratively with Anna Cassell and also with various other members of her spiritualist group. And again, the Tree of Knowledge. Before Hildegard Bingen, who I mentioned, she was deeply interested in this idea of the Tree of Knowledge, and we're going to be talking about this more when we go into a group. This is Anna Cassell, who I mentioned, and another one of her extraordinary paintings from 1913. And then we move quickly on to Baroness Hilla Rebay. Now, she's a fascinating character, and she was also a theosophist and very interested in spiritualism and abstraction. She was a close friend of Kandinsky's. She moves to America, to New York, in the first part of the 20th century. She meets Solomon Guggenheim, and she does his portrait. She then becomes his art advisor, and then she persuades him to open a museum, which of course became the Guggenheim Museum. And she became the first director of the Guggenheim. And you can see here, this is her first exhibition. Look how low the paintings are hung, so that when you're looking at these paintings, you could sort of almost enter them. And these are some Kandinsky's. And she opened these. When she opened this first exhibition in what we'd call now pop-up space, she burnt incense and played Beethoven and Bach to create a sort of immersive experience. And of course, there's the Guggenheim when it opens in 1959. And then we see Hilma af Klint opening at the Guggenheim in 2018. And Hilma always wanted to show her work in a kind of temple form. So it was so beautifully apt that she ended up with this major exhibition at the Guggenheim, which was, in a sense, a building built on theosophical ideas. So that's my quick whistle stop through some of the ideas I talk about in my book in terms of the 19th century. So I'm going to pass over now to wonderful Hilma's Ghost, a continuation of the wonderful Hilma af Klint. Great.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. You've done so much of our work for us by contextualizing us in that incredible history. Of course, there's so much more, but thank you, for narrating some of that to us. So we are Hilma's Ghost. I am the other half of Hilma's Ghost. I'm sure Mr. Ray, and I'm going to get us started off. We like to read our mission statement to start off, so I'm going to read it. Hilma's Ghost is a feminist artist collective that believes society is on the cusp of a new spiritual zeitgeist. Our collective began at the height of the pandemic in order to forge a community with women, non-binary, and trans artists working in the realm of the spiritual. Drawing inspiration from our namesake, Hilma af Klint, a revolutionary artist and mystic, we assert that the contributions of women artists working with esoteric subject matter have been overlooked and undermined. We use ritual and magic traditions to make artwork collaboratively, run esoteric workshops for artists, and uplift underappreciated spiritual and creative practices. So we like to say that, that the Hilma af Klint show that Jennifer was talking about, and maybe many of you have seen, really opened up this portal. And yes, this design is taken from the Hilma af Klint painting you see behind me as well. And these are the areas in which Hilma's ghost works. We've both been independent artists for 2 decades. The pandemic brought us together, and there was really a kind of combustion that happened, the spontaneous combustion, which led to the kind of creation of our collective. And so these are some of the areas that we work in, and some of the areas that we'll talk about. So you have community, ritual, research, collaboration, curation, publications, and education. And we'll talk about some of those things today.
So hello, everybody. I'm Danielle Tegeter, the other half of Hilma's Ghost. So we're going to begin, with our tarot deck, and I'll try to talk a little bit personally as artists of how Hilma's Ghost was started. And we had no intention of making artwork together, which we now actually find hilarious, because there was obviously a spiritual plan behind that. But we started doing online programming in the dead of the pandemic. Sharmista and I are both academics as well, and professors. So we started collaborating with shamans and witches, and it was really incredible. We started really having so many people come from all over the world. We were then offered an opportunity to show at the Armory Fair in New York through our gallery in Chicago, and we created the Abstract Futures Tarot. We decided to make a tarot deck. I mean, there's an incredible feminist history in tarot, and of course, here's Pamela Coleman Smith, the Rider-Waite Smith deck on the right. Almost all decks, including ours, comes from that. And we like to say we almost work like jazz musicians. We came together for a period of 4 months, and I would actually say we really channeled these. And we really wanted to make an inclusive abstract deck. We both have long careers as abstract artists separately. And so what you're seeing here is the deck and the original drawings installed. So from all the colors, like the black is the major arcana, the blue are pentacles, and so forth. So we've editioned the deck as artist editions, and here are a few examples. On the left is the High Priestess, of course, feminine intuition and guidance, and on the right is the card, the Lovers, 2 major arcana cards. And I want to say these were made with gouache, ink, colored pencil, and how they were made is that we would pass them back and forth. We would sit like across from one another and constantly just kind of, we like to say we kind of, kill each other's work in some ways and bring it back to life. So we then started creating collaborative paintings from our tarot deck, and they're essentially readings. So we would lay out 5 to 10 cards, and a lot of these symbols would then be fused into a painting. I also should say we were doing a lot of magic around this. So we would, we treat our Hilma's Ghost space and studio in a very different way than our own studio. We're cleansing, we're invoking, we're lighting candles, we're doing magic, we're doing sigils, we're practicing candle magic. And this is a large 16-foot painting called Cosmic Altar. Again, a number of our tarot in a way fused with all this information, and the titles are messages. Thank you.
Another body of work that we did together is called Crow Magic. Of course, being artists, we're really interested in color, but also its art history, and specifically in the way that women have used it as a device for channeling spirit. Amy Hale, who has written much about women and spiritualism as well, said colors are forces, and I think that's true. So we, Hilma's Ghost, of course, we had to take a stab at our own color wheel. We created this color wheel on the left in order to guide us to making a body of work, which was going to be using color magic. And, of course, the feminine, in terms of the feminine principle, is so closely related to nature, the elements, crystals, of course, that come from the earth, lots of, witches are drawn to crystals. Spiritualists are drawn to crystals, and that's the reason why they actually have vibrational energy, and can, are very effective in channeling. And so we created this color wheel, and we've used it in a number of projects, but this is when we had created it, and each of the colors also relate to affirmations and qualities that you want to invoke in your life. So that idea of manifestation, and affirming certain qualities in your life. The color wheel on the right is Ithel Colquhoun. Also, it was a forgotten woman artist, has also been recovered. There's going to be a big show at Tate Britain in Cornwall, actually coming up very soon. I don't know if it's already open, but it's opening. And again, she actually did many different studies on the color wheel, the Hermetic color wheel that was created by the Golden Dawn Society in the early part of the 20th century. And it incorporates sigils. The originals incorporate sigils, magic, but also Christian mysticism and Kabbalism as well. So, and Ithel did many studies of it of her own. And these are two of the works. In total, we made I think it was 8 works for the series, and these are also done on paper. People tell us later that, there's really such a sense of order in the work, even though there's 2 people making it. But really these are made, as Danielle said, in a very improvisational way. We're really kind of responding to each other, and we have very different visualities in abstraction, and this really becomes a fusion of both our approaches. Radical Spirits, this was an exhibition we were invited to do at the Hillstead House in Connecticut. This has a really interesting history. The woman on the right is Theodate Pope Riddle. And she was, really one of these aristocratic women at the end of the 19th and early 20th century, the kind that Jennifer was speaking about, who was deeply involved in both spiritualism and the suffragette movement. She was a major philanthropist, gave to many social causes, was really ahead of her time, was one of America's first licensed women architects. She built this estate for her parents, and now it has a contemporary wing. But really, even though she has been talked about within the realm of even, kind of forward-thinking practices on agriculture, for example, the spiritualist history was again erased, like so many other spiritualist histories. And we were really invited to come in and research, this history of the house and of her. And so we went to the house. We conducted seances with a professional witch and medium called Sarah Potter, who was sitting there with her back to us, and Danielle and I are on either side of her. What's really remarkable about this photo is that it was taken on a timer with an iPhone, and Danielle looks like she's levitating, and we have no idea. We've shown this picture to so many people, and no one can find her feet. And we swear this is not a doctored photo. It's, the discoveries you make along the way are kind of remarkable. So we found a little, what's called a theorem painting, which is was kind of thought of as woman's work. That's on the right-hand side, and we used it to build a body of work. And this was made either by Theodate's grandmother or her great-grandmother. They had the same name, but we found this sitting in a drawer. And we're both painting professors, but we had never seen theorem painting before. It's actually one of America's heritage crafts, classified heritage crafts. And so, of course, we were like, we need to learn how to do this. And so we did. I'm just going to show you about a minute and a half from this video, because lots of people ask us about our process, and I'm just going to take it forward and start here.
Now housed in Hillstead's library, is a core element of this exhibition.
Can everyone hear this?
Which entwines the history of spiritualism in the Americas and Europe with automatic processes in the arts. As part of their research, Tegeter and Ray participated with Sarah Potter in channeling and drawing sessions at the historic house, all while engaging in other ritual and divinatory practices to create 5 new paintings for the show. These new works recover the lost art of theorem painting, a popular stenciling technique that was taught in girls' academies throughout New England in the 1800s. More than a century later, Tegeter and Ray have reimagined the techniques within theorem painting through an abstract and contemporary lens to honor and reclaim women's work. In this style, women used handmade stencils and numbered formulas to create fruit and floral arrangements that were highly favored painting subjects. Using a stiff brush on velvet areas within the plotted stencils, distinct color shapes could comprise complex compositional schemas of overlapping and interlocking forms. To make their compositions through an automatic process, Hilma's ghost created a series of written instructional and magical prompts with the help of their witch, Sarah Potter. Potter randomly drew these prompts out of a large jar, while Tegeter and Ray drew. A prompt could vary from drawing geometric shapes to envisioning color meditations, tracing invisible symbols, or mixing a magical elixir to drink. The exercise utilized the element of guided intention to focus the artist's individual presence and actions. For the paintings, the artists created over 200 custom stencils that enabled a special staining technique for oil.
So I'm going to stop it there just in the interest of time. If you want to see the rest of that video, Matilda will send it to you after this program. It's on our website. And it contextualizes the work that we did, as well as kind of telling you more about our practice. So I'm just going to show you some of the works that came out of it. We had to learn this technique from scratch, which is its own really interesting story. And these are the 5 paintings together.
So this is just moving into another body of work, and this was shown in Chicago at Secret Beach Gallery last year, and it was an overview of our work for 2 years. And there's also a catalog that Amy Howell wrote on. This is our sigil series, and it is really inspired by the thought forms that Jennifer showed, palette-wise, spiritual-wise. The sigil forms, and sigils really are ancient and go back to the Seal of Solomon and many others, but our form of sigil making comes from Austin Osman Spare. And if you see the words on the left, the sigil making is really a witchcraft where you're cultivating and transitioning the text and manifesting it. So we do this in our studio a lot. A lot of our paintings have sigils on the back, and this was a series of 24 works on paper that were sigils.
Wow.
And I would say they're talismanic. This is, we're very happy to say this. This is our new work coming up this spring. We are doing a permanent project with the MTA, which is the New York City subway system. And again, this really must have come from Beyond the Veil and Hilma and everyone else, because we now will have a permanent project, which will be 60 feet of glass mosaic in Grand Central Station. And this comes from our Abstract Futures tarot deck. It is really like a spiritual journey through a material realm. And we're just going to show you a little snippet. It will be open in May. So everyone can come through Grand Central. We really think of the subways as portals or metaphors for portals. And Shermis is going to play the video just so you can see. But it's glass. It's being laid out in Italy, right outside of Venice right now. And just beautiful materials. So we're just, so excited about this, obviously. So that's a very quick overview. And back to Shamrista.
Yeah, so we want to end with our school, both being educators. Of course, we got the itch to create our own alternative school. It's itinerant, and we take it to different places. This is an image of Danielle and myself in our studio in Brooklyn, our last studio, and we held these magical workshops, and we're interested in combining art with magic. And that's how Hilma's Ghost actually started. We didn't really, it was a year before we made work together. Physically, we actually started during the pandemic on Zoom and having these free sessions where we would invite shamans, tarot readers, occultist poets, and we would bring it together with a component of art making. And they became wildly popular, and so this is really kind of goes back to our roots in a way. And we always have an altar, which you can see, which is a lot more loaded up now. And we also curate shows. We've curated 2 versions of Cosmic Geometries. This was the first one that was in New York City, and we brought together primarily women, non-binary, trans, queer artists together in the space, really investigating these notions of abstraction and mysticism. And this is an image of us working in a divinatory way. We laid the entire exhibition out through the tarot, and were guided by the tarot. And it's kind of hilarious to us both that there was a New York Times review by a feminist, I would call her a feminist writer, who talked about how well-placed the work was. So we think Hilma of Klint. Huh?
Jillian Steinhauer.
Yeah, it was amazing, and talked about, we think Hilma of Klint is very happy with that because she was working through us and the tarot. This is an image from the edition of Cosmic Geometries that happened in Chicago last year with Midwestern artists. We also collaborate with the artist Eve Biddle, who started the Mosaic Project, also a great community project for artists in upstate New York. And we've been doing these community dinners that incorporate participatory rituals, candle magic, and channeling cards. They're really very powerful. The image on the left, we like to call out Tracy Bashkoff, who is reading that card. She is a curator, was a curator of the Hilma af Klint show that has changed all of our lives in mysterious ways. This is an image from the Shaker workshop. We did a collaborative work. We did a workshop with the Shakers at the American Folk Art Museum a couple of months ago. It was really kind of incredible. We channeled the women, Shaker women artists in the room, and the participants made their own Shaker drawings. It was really kind of a remarkable experience and shows how these traditions are really threaded through with each other. So this is a slide just kind of showing the kind of collectivity, the collaborative spirit of the work we do. We write texts. We're on the editorial board of Feminist Art Researches and Practices, a new journal that has come out with an amazing collective of women thinkers and art historians and so forth. The workshops we run, the rituals, the participatory nature of our work, and also making ritual objects. If you'd like to reach us, this is how you can reach us. So we're very active on Instagram. We post all of our rituals and workshops there. We like to call this our band photo because sometimes we feel like we're in a band. And you can also go to our website. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was really wonderful presentations. And thank you for this beautiful work, Hilma Ghost, and also Jennifer for this research. And yeah, it's very inspiring. We're going to move on to the conversation now. And we have questions that we prepared together, and as well as some images and artworks in the exhibition that we will discuss together for the second part of this program. So the first slide presents delicate cutouts by Polly Jane Reed, and so these cutouts were take the form of arts and leaf, and they were given as tokens to other believers in the Shaker community. So as I mentioned in my introduction, gift drawings were messages that took the form of drawings, but also text and songs, and they all belonged in the line of drawings. And so these images were picked by Jennifer. So my question goes to you. What drew you to this cutouts, and also more generally in the conversation about mystical art and abstraction?
Oh, thanks, Mathilde. And thank you so much, Hilma's Ghost. That was an amazing presentation. Loved it. I cannot wait to see your piece in the train station. Amazing. Yeah, thank you, Mathilde. I just thought these were so beautiful, these two. What are they? Are they drawings? Are they pieces of writing? Are they objects? You sent through kindly transcription of what was written on them, because it's a bit hard to see. And, you know, when you read what was written, they're extraordinarily sort of ecstatic texts, and they're objects that were given as gifts. And as, I mean, I'm no expert on, by any means, on Shaker art, but I've been reading up a lot on it. And what I can gather is that the word art was sort of frowned upon, and it wasn't really used. And so what you have happening here, you know, in 1844 is this young woman, Polly Jane Reed, who wants to give something as a gift. So it's a token of love to someone. And she's not thinking about hierarchies of painting or drawing or writing, or she's not pigeonholing herself. You know, what she's doing in a way is what, you know, concrete poets were going to do 100 years later, or more than 100 years later, in terms of, you know, modern artists exploring different ways of combining text and shape. And so I just think these are extraordinarily sort of mysterious and beautiful and generous objects. You know, they were created as the women who made art were known as instruments, and so they were instruments of the spirit. And so Polly Jane Reed is creating this as an instrument, so she's channeling higher powers. So I mean, there is so much we could say about these, but just initially, when especially the leaf, I thought that was so simple and so beautiful, with these also these stars going down the stem. Yeah, just wonderful things.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. And so the next slide we have is an artwork, the two-sided work on paper by Samantha Fairbanks and Mary Weeks. And I think what drew you to this work, Sharmita and Daniel, is that it was a collaborative work. But also, and I think in the case of Shaker drawings, what is of interest to us in this conversation is that it's not only made by 4 or several hands, but also it's a sort of communication with ancestors from spirits. So I was wondering if you consider your work also as a form of collaboration with the deceased and with another world. So it's like more than just you two.
Yes, I mean, absolutely. And I think that, you know, when we step into the studio, like I mentioned, we're doing invocations and things to bring in those spirits. So obviously Hilma of Klint, but really so many, you know, other women artists. And, you know, I tend to think most artists are already invoking those in some ways. Like those lines really become very gray. But we try to really do it literally with candles, lightings, and things like that. The idea of collaboration, I mean, really is at the heart of Hilma's Ghost. And I think it's, you know, we have this really context of thinking about, especially within painting, of it being this very egotistical Jackson Pollock, where you see over and over again between the Shakers and Hilma of Klint. We even got Hilma of Klint's story wrong in some ways, that those are hugely collaborative, and that is coming out more and more, right? So go ahead, Shamista.
Yeah, no, I just want to, you know, exactly, you know, I agree with what Danielle has said. And I think that, you know, there's so much we don't know about the non-physical, the unseen world. And I think that, you know, unfortunately, art history has tried to follow science in being very rational and linear and based on what we can physically see. And we now know that that has, you know, left out a lot of art history, and that it really needs to be rewritten in a kind of way. And so we are really open. We call ourselves believing skeptics. I think we're becoming more believing and less skeptics the more we do this, because we realize when you leave things up to chance, that there, you know, you have to be open to what comes back at you. Like, it's like that photograph that we took, you know, in the Hillstead house. We had, you know, no idea that you know, that idea, you know, that photograph was going to come out that way. And so there is something else present, and we maybe don't have language for that, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. As Hilma of Klint has shown us, as Anna Mary Howitt, you know, Georgiana Houghton, Paulina Peavy, who was communicating with an alien. You know, it's so easy to, you know, kind of be skeptical about these stories, but at the end of the day, they've really formed the raw material for visual cultures as well. And we have to be able to look at those visual cultures and also talk about their sources and inspirations.
Thank you for this. Yeah, and I think also something that came up a lot during our conversations, and also Jennifer mentioned it just earlier, talking about the cutouts, is that Shaker woman instruments were not considering making arts. They were just giving messages and translating them. And that's something that Jennifer, as she mentions, that was very interesting, and that was also allowed by the community. So because there was a lot of prohibitions against art and decoration in the Shakers community, but those gift drawings were allowed and they were encouraged. And so Jennifer had this question for you too about the definition of art and how important was it to you and to your practice?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that this idea of the gift is so interesting. I mean, we look at the work of Lewis Hyde, who wrote, about, the kind of art being a kind of gift to society. And so, art is really a kind of category, but it's an important one because it's one that has also excluded so many women's voices. I mean, you look at the work of, of course, Hilma af Klint, she was discouraged by Rudolf Steiner, in terms of using these really unconventional methods to make her work. And so she stopped for a little period of time. And it's the same with Georgiana Houghton. I believe that John Ruskin also told her that she was, making work in a really unconventional way. And so over and over again, you have these patriarchal voices, as respected as they are, and as important as the work that they did, is that they were also somewhat responsible for crushing women's spirits, and I think that, that idea of the gift is a really kind of important one because it both can be situated within the realm of art, but, I think that kind of reclaiming that space for art is really important in kind of a feminist art history.
Yeah, I mean, in regards to, Lewis Hyde's The Gift, and every time I hear The Gift, I go back to, I mean, he was talking in a way a very different context, but there are some things about them becoming like non-commodified, I think, about the idea of creating community through gift giving. And I think that even though, perhaps the Shaker women were doing this secret, you see that there was so much collaboration happening. There was obviously a secondary community happening within that, which is just incredible, to see. And again, the idea of commodification, we go through this, making work collaboratively, it goes against the whole art market in every way. It's not set up for art history to talk about. It's not set up for galleries to deal with. There's a whole way that things have to function around it. So interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe we go over the next slides. And as you will see, it's a series of trees made by the Shaker woman. And so it's a motif that is very important in the exhibition and in the Shaker gift drawings. Trees, as well as flowers were important motif as a reward from the faithful Shaker. So they're represented throughout the drawings. And then you have another one here. So it's different motif of the tree of light, tree of life, the tree of knowledge. And so that's a question more for Jennifer, who's been studying representations of trees and different symbols throughout the practices of women. And so I was wondering if you had anything to say about the tree and how did it appear in your research and what the meaning of this symbol for spiritualists and for artists. And I'm going to end with two trees that appear in the book, Jennifer.
Well, yeah, I mean, the tree of life is, of course, a huge subject, and it's appeared as a metaphor, as a symbol. It's appeared as an archetype in cultures and religions, for thousands of years. I think the earliest representation is in 7,000 BC, I think, in Turkey. And so it's been a very important symbol, of course, in the Kabbalah and in many Hebrew texts, and also in the Bible. We have the tree of life and the tree of knowledge, which are in the Garden of Eden. And it's also an important symbol in the Hindu religion. It appears very wonderfully in a lot of Assyrian reliefs, very ancient Assyrian reliefs as well. So you see this as a symbol sort of popping up across cultures and religions over centuries and over geographies. And of course, the tree is a wonderfully available metaphor as a sort of a connection between the celestial and the earthbound. That between heaven and hell, perhaps, between the interior life of someone and their exterior life. It's a connection between the sky and the earth. And Jung saw it in the tree, and he painted it many times in his secret book, the Red Book, which has only come to light in recent decades. He repeatedly returned to the tree of life as a form of as a symbol of the unconscious, of the interior life, that we have parts of us that go deep into who we are, others that reach up to the sky and up to the sun. The tree obviously goes through different stages of growing. It goes through different stages of seasons and manifests. It can be abundant, it can be barren. So he saw it as an archetype, really, of the human spirit. And then, of course, you've got Hilma af Klint doing the tree of knowledge here. And her botanical, throughout her life, she was fascinated by botany and nature. And she repeatedly drew from nature and then also used natural elements as sort of archetypal or symbolic elements in her drawings. And so you can see here that she's exploring a tree of knowledge, of different levels of knowledge, leading up to sort of perhaps the ultimate fulfillment in the heavenly sphere. I mean, all of these artists and thinkers who used the tree of life used it for different reasons. And obviously, it's often very culturally specific. So I don't want to generalize too much, but I'm sure many of the people who are watching this are very interested in the tree and know a lot more than I do too about it. So yeah, and it was just fascinating to see it rendered so beautifully in your exhibition at the Folk Museum. So I loved those pictures when I saw them. I think I gasped. Yeah.
Yes, those two are really incredible. I would love to also have you, Hilma, go say a few words about the tree and if it's something that appears in your work and what form does it take in your own collaborative work?
I mean, first of all, I mean, we are obviously making abstract work, but the way the way to magically think about trees within diagrams, of course, is how Hilma af Klint created her tree as well. I mean, I think this idea of transmission, when we're doing a lot of meditations or we're leading classes, we're also thinking about roots coming through our feet into the ground. And the idea of transformation central to creativity and magic in every way. This idea of water coming up and things growing, also elementally with the seasons and so forth. But this idea of transformation and having roots and a source, all of our work also descends or ascends in some way, very much like a tree, like a large system. So absolutely.
Yeah, we're so influenced by kind of images, of course, being visual artists. And so, we love this idea of the tree of life representing spirit in that way, and I think that comes into our work in a non-representational, an abstract, a symbolic way. Even though our work is abstract, it is highly symbolic, and we are drawing from across cultures, across images. And, the tree of life is one that is very, very central to so many traditions, as Jennifer said. So it's definitely there, but it takes a very different form.
Yes, also there is the verticality of your work. I feel like it connects with so many the ground to the
Absolutely.
sky. Yeah.
Which is always the idea, right? Is, the kind of the ground, the sky, kind of the cosmic and the physical and the human. So definitely. And the image behind us, I mean, Hilma's image here is so much about that channeling as well.
Totally. And the last slide that we have for this conversation, it was actually conceived by you and articulated by you, Shamita and Daniel. And so we have these beautiful drawings by two instruments. So, this was the name that the women who were like translating visions into drawings. And so Polly Jane Reed, who joined the committee at age 7, I wanted to reiterate that those young women were also very young when they were making those drawings. And Polly Collins went to Hancock with her siblings and her parents when she was a teenager. She was 19. So and these two women were prolific instruments, and they used a visual language that was revolved around a natural environment. So I would love to know why you picked these two images, and also how does that how does it connect with your own methodology and your approach to picture making? That's also a question that Jennifer had for you.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, like, we were just blown away by the show. It's a small but mighty show, and it's, not lost on us that almost all the shaker drawings were made by women. I mean, how astounding is that? I mean, there was a kind of, the Shakers were very progressive in their own way. I mean, they, believed in the equality of the sexes, from what I understand. Women were given this kind of importance in that society, and so yeah, I mean, just on a fundamental level, like this is really, so much a part of our research, but seeing these in the flesh just has a completely different effect. I mean, you get the kind of the physicality and the kind of tangibility and the kind of just, that human connection to the paper, that kind of sense of, these feel very automatic to me. There's a level of automatism. They may not have called it that because, still being a very Christian society, they didn't really believe in mediumship. That was kind of counter to the church's beliefs. But they did believe in the connection to the divine source and to ancestors, as you said, and kind of channeling that, So there's a kind of interiority to these, but also a sense of the macro and the cosmos, And I think that those two coming together in this way is just so remarkable. I mean, these are just remarkable to look at, and even in terms of sophisticated composition, I mean, they're so sophisticated, compositionally as well, and the way that they were taking from these elements, around them, because they were domesticated, they were thinking about their gardens, they were thinking about their own lives within the domestic sphere as well, and how these become part of a cosmology. I mean, these feel like mandalas to me, to be honest. They're so mandala-like. So over to you, Danielle, if you want to say anything about these.
Yeah, I mean, just the talismanic power of when you stand in front of a work of art, right? Which you can get it through the screen in some way, but I was talking about that with the sigils, that I would say, run to the museum if you can. And, I've been familiar with shaker drawings for a long time. I grew up in upstate New York, and, it's interesting to think of, like, even though perhaps they were saying they were channeling from the occult, they were in the burned over district in upstate New York in the early 19th centuries that included, this incredibly rich utopian political, that included, the Mormons, spiritualism, the Oneida Institute, which was huge and leading abolitionist, activities. So they were around that, and I also, so it was in the ethos of where these, I feel like it was around there in a lot of ways. And again, just the feminist context of this is, just incredible to me that these were being made in secret in some way. And they were not only that, they were given to the young women. And from what I understand, there was also a lot of jealousy from the elders that this gift was happening to these young women in a lot of ways, and this incredible power. So I just want to mention that because it's really just astounding. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to stop share now and continue this conversation and take some questions from the audience. We already have a lot of questions, but please continue sharing some questions on the chat and in the Q&A feature. And before we move on to the audience, I have one more question for you all. It's really also related to the context of this talk. We are at the American Folk Art Museum, and our mission is to champion underrepresented voices and offer also non-canonical art histories. So something that struck me in your presentation and in this conversation, it's really the way in which you are rewriting and revising modernist history, and that's maybe something more for Jennifer. And so what is your takeaway from this process of correction, and what does that take, you know, to rework whole main narrative of modernist abstraction? So it's a big question, but maybe good way to end our
That was for me. Yeah.
Yes, and for you, and yes.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we're at a really interesting and exciting moment in art history now. You know, I mean, you know, obviously for so long, art history was a story written by, you know, essentially white Western men about other white Western men. You know, not to say that many of these men weren't brilliant and offered great insights and made wonderful things, but art history now is acknowledging that a true history of art is one that represents all humans, you know? And so, you know, it's not about narrowing down the canon; it's expanding it. And all these extraordinary new stories and lives and creations are entering into the discourse, which is so exciting. I mean, you know, when I've written my last two books, I felt like Miss Marple. You know, on the trail, I'd discover one artist, and she'd lead me to another, and there'd be another and another, and I'd be going, "Oh my God, how can there be so many women who are making extraordinary things who I was never taught about in my undergraduate degree?" You know, and so, you know, once you get over the initial feelings of rage, it's one of excitement, you know, that there is so much left to discover, and there are so many inspiring women out there. And, you know, obviously, you know, me and other people investigating this area and writing about this area, standing on the shoulder of giants. You know, there have been 60 years of extraordinary feminist art historians who have done extraordinary work, you know, so it's important to acknowledge them all around the world. So, yeah.
And we have some questions. We might go over a little bit the time, so keep. I hope you can stick with us. Do you want to answer this question,
We'll
Daniel?
just answer it succinctly just by saying that, you know, I think, again, we are in this incredible time that, and you see, it's not only in art history, like, you know, tarot, for example, is now in the top 20 or 100 searches on Google. Like the whole world is in environmental collapse, political collapse, you know, and you were basically, you know, people are really these after the pandemic, we've encountered grief in a way we haven't in our entire lifetimes. So the rational ideas are not working anymore, and the collective wisdom of witches and wisdom and artists, you know, really needs to come in to heal that.
Yes, thank you. And we have a question actually about the term abstraction. What does abstraction mean to you? And yeah, and that's for the three of you.
I'll take a stab at that. What does abstraction mean to us? Well, abstraction has I mean, if we're talking about in the context of art, because, you know, it's can take many other forms, and, you know, depending what lens you're looking at it through. But certainly I think that, you know, there's been this binary, you know, within abstraction, within the arts, between kind of representation and non-representation. So even when we use non-representation, you know, we question it as well, you know, because non-representation doesn't mean the absence of meaning or connection to the world, right? It's not kind of a theoretical model And I think that in a way, what we're doing as well by bringing this idea of spirit, non-materiality, the immaterial, which is also an aspect of the human, right? It's a kind of a bigger dimension within which we exist, but which we don't always, we haven't really been taught to integrate into this kind of whole idea of what it means to be human. So I think that, we're really interested in kind of being in between what, representation and non-representation is, the space of real abstraction of, but also with imbued human meaning. I hope that doesn't sound too general.
We also, when we made our deck, one of the reasons we made an abstract deck is, although the Rider-Waite-Smith deck is amazing, it's incredibly problematic that it is pictorial, mostly almost all white people, heterosexual relationships. So we didn't want to work in a complete binary, and within working in an abstract context, we can really be more inclusive and go under those things that are images in some ways.
Jennifer, would you like to add something to?
I'd just say absolutely. I totally what you both said. I don't know that I can offer more, but all I will say is that abstraction, it's almost become meaningless as a word because everyone uses it for a different reason, so it's like saying figurative, which is useful in a sense because it indicates the look of something. But I think there are as many different ways of using abstraction as there are artists in the world.
We had some questions about also different women that have been maybe more visible in art history, so like Georgia O'Keeffe or Judy Chicago, and some question about how do you situate those works maybe in this history of spiritual art and spiritually driven art. Maybe Jennifer and of course Hilma, if you want to add something to that.
I mean, it would depend who we're talking about, really. But a wonderful artist like Judy Chicago, for example, who's been extraordinary in terms of her explorations, and like all good artists, she has a great and deep awareness of the past as well. I mean, you can just look at her work and see how much she's indebted to the thinking around feminist art historians, and also how she acknowledges the great artists of the past in her exhibitions, in her exhibition making, in the references she makes in her work, and obviously, with very almost literal works like the dinner party, So, yeah. Sorry, now I've forgotten what the rest of the question was.
Yes, it's you answered about Judy Chicago, and also someone was asking about Georgia O'Keeffe. When I think that this person was also asking if you situate Georgia O'Keeffe also in this type of history of art, and how would you place her in that history? Do some of the work
about that. Just it's also the context that we have not had this context of looking at all these artists with a spiritual context. So we've talked about Georgia O'Keeffe and these vaginal forms and the politics around Judy Chicago, but Judy Chicago has very magical, she has a whole video that is about witches and color magic, and so it's just this lens that has been removed from all these work. That not that it has, it should not include other things, but when you start looking at Judy Chicago within a lens of spirituality, it's there. You really see it.
Yeah,
or many other artists.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I mean, if you look at, Judy Chicago's The Dinner Party, right? Like there are, also deities invited to that dinner party. I mean, there are the names of deities, there's like Kali, there's other ones from different cultures, from, voodoo. There's Sappho, the lesbian poet, right? Like there's all these also fictional, non-fictional characters coming into a space. And I think that, I think someone like Judy Chicago, the birthing series, I mean, what an incredible spiritual series of paintings, the birth series, this idea of woman connecting to the source at the moment of birthing, right? Like, I think that is also can be seen metaphorically. I think for a long time, people have been afraid to apply a certain kind of language, as both Danielle and Jennifer said. I do want to say about Georgia O'Keeffe that she had a very powerful man in her life, Alfred Stieglitz, who really wrote about the feminine in relationship to her work, which meant that for a long time she was not really seen very seriously as an artist who was also quite radical in terms of her use of color, the landscape, and abstraction. And I think that, but there's such a great sense of place and spirituality in her work. But I think that because she had already been kind of feminized in this way, as kind of making these, female sexual organs in this way, she was really trying to get, she wanted to be seen seriously and to be contextualized differently. And I don't think that is different for artists working 100 years after that, women artists who have also sought to be taken seriously and have tried to kind of step away from certain frames of description around their work. But I think that is slowly changing.
That's fascinating. Thank you so much, Arita. And I think something, maybe Jennifer, I'm sure you have something to add, but something that I also noticed in your study, in your book, is that you make so many connections between ecological art and spiritual art. And I think Georgia O'Keeffe also has this kind of connection. So I don't know if there's something to add there as well.
I probably won't add a lot about Georgia O'Keeffe because I actually don't know about her so deeply, and I didn't include her in my book, but she's obviously an artist who's brilliant and fascinating. But yeah, I'll leave that one.
I mean, you said ecology, right, Mathilde?
Yes, I think
I just want to say the whole core of witchcraft is, I always say, like, the witches were the first ecologists, they were the first environmentalists, right? So, I mean, just again, it's that context of these lenses that have been removed. Look, if you think about Georgia O'Keeffe's work, what about the lens of sex magic, or things like that, or using that as power? That conversation has never even happened around her work, and it's obviously about feminine sexual magic in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's something I also found fascinating, Jennifer, in your work. It's how you really make connection about ecological thinking and all these spiritualist women. So I don't know if you, yes, that's something that I just wanted to also highlight here, because that's something that I don't think that's been done much before. So again, thank you so much, Jennifer, for this wonderful work. Yeah, there's one more question maybe that we can add if everyone wants to stick with us. We'll just go over a few minutes and then we'll end up and this program. So someone asked how traditional feminine craft influence female abstract arts in their creation and the reception of their work. So the relation between abstraction and craft.
I mean, can I just quickly mention Annie Albers, in this? And, I think one of the really important exhibitions that I saw in the last few years was the exhibition at Tate Modern of Annie Albers. And it was the first time, I think, that, a major artist who's using fiber, for example, was used in the context of sort of art museum. And obviously an extraordinary artist who's using, ancient ideas around pre-Incaic, ideas around weaving and the meaning of weaving, and, obviously the metaphor of warp and weft, an extraordinary artist. And then you look at the next generation of artists, say people like Sheila Hicks or Lenore Tawney, doing extraordinary work around this as well. And I think that what these women have done in the most powerful way has been to look at a kind of labor that was traditionally feminine and seeing no distinction in that between that and, say, abstract painting in terms of hierarchies of value. And I think that's, apart from the fact that they've made extraordinarily beautiful things, that's a very powerful activist action as well.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. Absolutely. I mean, I think textiles is an area where that is most evident. There's an interesting book that has been written about the Bauhaus women called The Haunted Bauhaus. So there was also an element of the occult happening there as well. But I also want to say that even though we're talking within the category of art, so many of these artists, men included, women, you look at the pattern and decoration movement where that is evidenced as well, this relationship between women, abstraction, and crafts, is that they owe a big debt to pre-modern societies, to indigenous societies as well, to pre-modern cultures. So, I mean, I think that, art is just a category that we exist in, but really the source material is far more vast.
I mean,
Absolutely.
we were, for example, astounded when we created our theorem paintings that we have taught painting for 20 to 25 years each. And we had both never heard of theorem painting. I mean, incredible paintings. I mean, we're doing a whole series now on hex signs in, Pennsylvania, Dutch country. Same thing. So we had to go actually to, I really want to acknowledge this, that we went to a woman, who was a Quaker in Pennsylvania, who taught us how to make those, because the Quakers in the United States preserve American heritage crafts. And so, yes, of course, like these have been, disappeared, not talked about, put in a secondary tier, and of course, mostly because they were, women centered.
Thank you so much. We're going to wrap up, and I would like to thank you, the three of you, for this wonderful presentation, for your engagement with the topic, and for this wonderful conversation. It was really such a treat to have you at the American Folk Art Museum. So thank you. And we're going to end this wrap up by ancestral giving. And so please just stick with us. And so I also would like to thank the Shaker Museum, and particularly Sarah Van Buren, for their support in making this program possible. And also I want to thank my colleague Richard Ho and Rachel Rosen for their support. And I would like to thank everyone on the call for joining us. So many of you shared their questions, comments, and love, and that was really wonderful. So thank you. I hope you have the opportunity to come to the museum in the coming months. The exhibition, Anything But Simple Gift Drawings and the Shaker Aesthetic, is closing tonight at 6 p.m. You have a few hours. And along with playing with design, game boards, art and culture, but the museum will reopen on February 12th with a retrospective of a Brazilian artist named Madalena Santos Rainbows. And the work is absolutely wonderful, magnificent. So please come back to the museum, and we'll have a new iteration of a collection-based show, Somewhere to Roost. And we will also continue offering programs, both virtual and in person. So please have a look at the FM website so to see what's coming up next. And I hope you will consider supporting our programs through donation after this program. And now we're going to end with an ancestral prayer. So thank you, Charita, who is going to close this program.
Thank you so much, Mathilde, your whole team, Jennifer, Danielle, everyone who attended today. It's just been, I felt spirit present very much. I've kind of had to expand my chest throughout. And, Hilma's Ghost, as Jennifer also mentioned earlier, we owe such a great debt to everyone who came before us. We cannot work in the context we're working in without incredible contributions that have come before. So we always close with an ancestral closing, all our workshops, all our programs, to continually acknowledge that. And so if you'd like to close your eyes in this part, it'll just be a minute, and then I will read the names of the women artists who made the Shaker gift drawings in this show. So I invite you to close your eyes. This is an invocation for our artistic ancestors and spiritual guardians. We honor your spirit, your agency, the power you have invested in the cause of art. It is because of you that we find our inner strength, and we use it purposefully for ourselves and the cause of feminism, for generations of women, non-binary, and trans practitioners of all races, ethnicities, and other markings, past, present, and future. We, the guardians of the divine feminine and her eternal spirit, endeavor to smash the patriarchy and build in its place a true and inclusive utopia that can hold and honor us all, our creation, our sense of self, and our spirit for the cause of artistic freedom. Polly Jane Reed, Polly Collins, Hannah Cahoon, Miranda Barber, Samantha Fairbanks, Mary Wicks, Sarah Bates, Miranda Barber. We thank you for your contributions. can open your eyes.
Thank you so much. And see you next time online.
Thank you so much. That was so beautiful. And I feel so honored to have taken part in this. Thank you so much, Hilma's Ghost and Matilda and everyone at the Folk Museum.
So much.